You gentlemen may sit down. We're waiting for some more folks to come in before we can start the hearing, but you might as well be comfortable while you're waiting. Okay, I think we're ready to go. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate the witnesses' presence today. We welcome you to the subcommittee hearing on satellite television laws contained in Title 17 of the U.S. Code. Not unlike other copyright issues before Congress, the circumstances surrounding disputes over our satellite television laws are exceedingly complicated and important to every congressional district. When it comes to video, I believe there are some points on which we can all agree. Americans love to watch television and want to have as many choices available at the lowest possible price. This committee has created 3 compulsory licenses to make content more available. While in some instances these licenses have served consumers and stakeholders efficiently and effectively, I believe it is safe to say that that compulsory licenses are not without their shortcomings. The classic example is when a local sports competition or a popular show is suddenly unavailable. You go home looking forward to seeing that particular show involved, and you're unable to get it. You're likely to turn off the television and call someone to complain. I think that's a natural result. Regardless of what perspective a member of Congress has on licensing issues, we can all learn one truth. Our constituents aren't shy about telling us to do something about problems in the marketplace that deprive them of their favorite shows. As we begin this review of the satellite licenses, one of our goals will be to find solutions to situations where the laws tend to benefit one party over the other. Throughout this discussion, our top priority will be to protect the interests of consumers. When there's a dispute and a resulting blackout, consumers are left with no recourse. Again, this is an extremely complex area of copyright law, and I'm pleased by our talented and highly qualified panel of witnesses who are participating in today's hearing. I'm now pleased to recognize the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina, the ranking member, Congressman Mel Watt, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and today is the first of what I suspect will be a series of hearings to consider the reauthorization of the Satellite Television Extension and Localism Act, or what we call STELA, which, among other things, extended the 119 license through December 31, 2014. Enacted in 1988, the Satellite Home Viewer Act created a copyright compulsory license for the benefit of the satellite industry to retransmit distant television signals to its subscribers. The license, codified in Section 119 of the Copyright Act, was originally intended to ensure the availability of broadcast programming to satellite providers and to foster competition with the cable industry, which has enjoyed a permanent compulsory license to retransmit copyrighted content contained in both local and distant broadcast television signals since passage of the Copyright Act of 1976. The intent of providing compulsory copyright licenses was to facilitate investment in new creative works by the satellite and cable industries by eliminating direct negotiation with the copyright owners for the use of distant signal programming. Through the 119 compulsory license, although the 119 compulsory license is temporary, and therefore the focus of the reauthorization we will be considering, it is part of a complex statutory and regulatory framework governing cable and satellite retransmission of broadcast signals, making it virtually impossible to consider whether to reauthorize the provision in a vacuum. For that reason, the Committee on Energy and Commerce, which has jurisdiction over key regulations and statutory provisions that govern the broadcast market, has held multiple hearings in this Congress on whether to repeal, revise, or reauthorize STELA. 4 years ago, under the leadership of Chairman Conyers, the Judiciary Committee also grappled with a number of issues that had emerged in the marketplace in an effort to simplify and modernize what was largely perceived as an anachronistic regime for the provision of broadcast programming. Most immediately, we addressed the impending transition from analog to digital television. Other issues the committee considered at that time remain unresolved, while new technologies have further disrupted the market with innovations that we couldn't foresee less than a decade ago. I believe we have a unique opportunity to tackle some of the big issues that will define the future of video. Compulsory licenses, I think everyone will admit, represent a departure from free market negotiations and are usually the last resort in the event of market failure. When the compulsory licenses were first enacted, the cable and satellite industries were in their embryonic stages. Today, however, it is estimated that over 90% of American households subscribe to a pay TV service. So there are a myriad of issues that may be relevant for consideration. For example, are these licenses still necessary to foster competition, or should they be phased out as the Copyright Office and others have recommended? How many consumers truly benefit from these licenses? On the other hand, is the current overlapping web of communications and copyright policy functioning in a way that meets the goals of national media policy? It cannot be denied or disregarded that marketplace incumbents, including broadcasters, cable and satellite providers, and content creators, have entrenched interest and investments in a complex framework created by law. Would an abrupt dismantling of this structure be unfair to those industries and harmful to consumers? Can current law keep pace with new technologies that seek to exploit ambiguities in the legal framework? For example, what constitutes a public performance for retransmission consent purposes? Recently, the CBS Time Warner cable retransmission consent dispute resulted in a temporary blackout for some consumers. Is that dispute evidence of a broken system, or does it reflect a robust free market? Also, how should we address, or should we address, the nascent online video distribution models that in the future may very well displace the traditional distribution methods altogether? Are these internet-based video distribution models the new kids on the block, entitled to comparable statutory imposed rights, obligations, and prohibitions? Or is the time for government intervention over? These are only a few of the broad policy questions that I think are relevant in this space. I believe that we must determine whether the current regime is working to ensure that content providers and distributors, old and new, are appropriately compensated and incentivized in a way that provides a competitive environment for American consumers. We have an impressive and diverse group of expert witnesses today with very different views on how the marketplace works and how it has developed since Stella, and most probably what the rules of the road should be moving forward. I look forward to the testimony today and to continuing this dialogue in the future. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and thank you for the time.
I thank the gentleman for his opening statement. The chair now recognizes the distinguished gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Bob Goodlatte, the chairman of the Committee on Judiciary, for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your holding this hearing, and I look forward to the testimony of the witnesses. For decades, the vast majority of Americans have relied upon satellite and cable services for access to a wide variety of video content, ranging from nighttime entertainment for their families, educational shows for their children, local and national news with information that informs them, and public access channels that empower Americans to see their local, state, and federal representatives in action. As the number of channels and sources of video content continue to increase, a growing number of Americans now subscribe to additional services such as Redbox, Amazon, and Hulu, some of which create their own content. Americans are embracing these additional services to such a degree that society has coined two new terms: cord shavers and cord cutters, for those who are reducing or eliminating traditional video subscriptions. According to the FCC's latest competition report, in addition to free over-the-air broadcast content, 100% of Americans have access to 2 satellite services. 98% have access to these 2 satellite services and 1 local alternative, and 35% have access to 2 satellite services and 2 local alternatives. Marketplace competition has grown significantly since the last major committee activity in this area in 2010, when Congress enacted the Satellite Television Extension and Localism Act. There are 3 compulsory licenses in Title 17 impacting this industry, one of which expires at the end of 2014. This committee will consider over the next year whether a reauthorization of this compulsory license is warranted. However, as the written testimony submitted for this hearing demonstrates, some interested parties are advocating for Congress to undertake more than a simple reauthorization and look at other matters surrounding the video marketplace and competition policies that appear to have become more prominent recently. One core factor that this committee will weigh as we consider these important issues is ensuring that copyright owners maintain the right to distribute their intellectual property as they choose. This committee has traditionally disfavored compulsory licenses, although there are 3 in effect today in this marketplace. Another core factor we will weigh is ensuring competition in the marketplace. Consumers and intermediaries benefit where there is robust competition. As the Committee of Jurisdiction for Competition Policy, efforts that involve competition issues deserve this committee's oversight and ongoing attention. The written testimony the witnesses here this morning highlights the importance of both issues to the video marketplace. As this committee continues its oversight and legislative activities in this area, I look forward to hearing from all interested parties about their perspectives and concerns. And I thank the chairman and yield back.
I thank you, Chairman Goodlatte. The chair now recognizes the distinguished gentleman from Michigan, Mr. John Conyers, the ranking member on the Committee on Judiciary, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. The Satellite Television Extension and Localism Act is full of options that we have witnesses to distinguish. I want to thank the chairman for keeping the witness list down to 7. I understand we ran out of tables and we weren't able to put on any more people than are here. I want to consider these options, and I look forward to the witness testimony. 2 considerations, one about copyright owners and the other about consumers. We must protect copyright owners because it's their property that forms the basis of the entire scheme. Compulsory licenses are generally not favored because they distort the marketplace and result in below market rates being paid to content owners. Second, we must enact policies that protect consumers and safeguard competition. Consumers benefit from increased competition because more competition usually produces lower prices. And copyright owners do not benefit financially from retransmission consent agreements which is at the heart of these disputes, despite the fact that the signal only has worth because of the programming contained on the signal. And so I think we must focus on principles of localism. People who subscribe to cable or satellite television have so many options, there's never a shortage of something to watch. But even with all these choices, people still highly value their local news, their local sports, and need local channels to deliver community service and emergency information. Localism and the traditional network affiliate relationship also benefits copyright owners by allowing their programming to be publicly performed in every market across the country. Now, I conclude by observing that there will be circumstances in which these principles will conflict. I look forward to working to ensure that the public interest can best be served through satellite carriage of broadcast television signals. And I thank the chairman for allowing me to make these few brief remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Conyers. I appreciate that. As indicated before, we have a very distinguished panel before us today, and I'll begin by swearing in the witnesses. Gentlemen, if you would please rise. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that all witnesses concur with that. And I will now introduce our panel, and we appreciate everyone's attendance at this very important hearing. Our first witness today is Mr. Paul Donato, Executive Vice President and Chief Research Officer of the Nielsen Company. Mr. Donato is responsible for overseeing the development and evaluation of research, while also serving as Nielsen's liaison to its clients and industry associations. He received his BA in Psychology and Sociology from the State University of New York at Stony Brook. Our second witness is Mr. Stanton Dodge, Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary for DISH Network. Mr. Dodge is responsible for all legal and government affairs for DISH and its subsidiaries. He received his BS in Accounting from the University of Vermont. Our third witness is Mr. Gerald Waldron, partner at Covington & Burling, testifying today on behalf of the National Association of Broadcasters. With more than 25 years' experience in law and public policy, his practice focuses on communication and technology. Mr. Waldron received his BA degree from the University of Virginia. Chairman Goodlatte has now asked permission to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to welcome our fourth witness and my constituent, Mr. Earl McKenzie, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Shentel Cable, testifying on behalf of the American Cable Association. With 35 years of telecom experience, Mr. McKenzie is responsible for Shentel's daily operations of its many subsidiaries. He received his BA in Accounting from the College of William and Mary. Earl, welcome. We are delighted to have your testimony today as well.
I thank the chairman. Our next witness is our fifth witness today, is Mr. James Campbell, Vice President for Public Policy at CenturyLink. Mr. Campbell is responsible for the company's regulatory and legislative affairs and received his bachelor's degree from Santa Clara University. Our sixth witness is Mr. Robert Garrett, partner at Arnold & Porter, who is testifying today on behalf of Major League Baseball. Mr. Garrett joined Arnold & Porter in 1977 and has served as outside counsel to Major League Baseball on copyright and telecom issues for more than 35 years. Mr. Garrett attended the Northwestern University. Our seventh and final witness is Mr. Preston Patton, who is testifying on his own behalf today. With extensive career in the media business, he served as former president of the ABC television network and former executive vice president of the Walt Disney Company. He received his BA from the University of Maryland. We welcome you all, and we will start, Mr. Donato, with you. You'll be the leadoff hitter today. Gentlemen, as is obvious to all, we have 7 witnesses. This could take a long time. We try to apply the 5-minute rule. There's a panel before you, and when that green light turns to amber, that's your signal that the time is running. The clock's running out. You have a minute to go. So at that point, we would appreciate if you would sort of wrap it up. We're trying to apply the 5-minute rule to us as well. So if you will respond tersely to our questions, that would be helpful as well. So Mr. Donato, why don't you start us off?
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Caldwell, Ranking Member Watt, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Paul Donato, and I'm Executive Vice President and Chief Research Officer for Nielsen. I thank you for the opportunity to join today's panel to discuss Nielsen's designated market area, commonly known as DMAs, and their role in satellite transmission statutes such as Stella. Nielsen is a global media and marketing research company that measures what people watch and buy in 100 countries worldwide. In the United States, we're widely known for our television audience measurement service, the Nielsen television ratings, which provide estimates of audiences for broadcast, cable, and satellite programs. Over the years, Nielsen has developed innovative technologies allowing us to expand our measurement services to include computers, tablets, and smartphones. Through these technologies and our volunteer opt-in panelists, Nielsen has the capability to measure consumer internet purchase habits, listening trends on terrestrial internet and satellite radio, and how consumers utilize social media. Our audience measurement reports are relied on by a range of public and private sector stakeholders to facilitate business transactions and gauge consumer trends. Nielsen's DMAs are also used by the federal government to define markets and satellite television retransmission statutes. Most discussions of Stella and its predecessors begin with a conversation about Nielsen's DMAs, and that will be the focus of my testimony today. The designated market area is a collection of counties which share a predominance of viewing to broadcast stations licensed to operate within a given standard metropolitan statistical area, as defined by the OMB. Predominance or dominance of viewing is defined here to indicate that for a particular county, homes may view broadcast stations licensed to operate from different but generally nearby metro areas. The DMA with the predominant viewing is that metro area whose broadcast stations have the highest share of audience for that county. So we start with a metro area such as New York or Los Angeles and continue on through the 201 DMA markets in the United States. Each March, using tuning data collected from Nielsen Homes over the last year, existing DMA regions are tested in order to verify that the dominant share of viewing from each DMA county continues to be from broadcast stations licensed to operate from within that same home metro. All assignments are based on share of household tuning between 6 a.m. and 2 a.m., Sunday through Saturday. And while this is the basic premise behind the DMA, there are rules which Nielsen exercises when it appears that the predominance of viewing may be shifting. These rules try to balance the need for stability in television markets, but at the same time the need to ensure that counties are assigned to the DMAs from where the highest share of broadcast viewing occurs. For example, if a larger share of viewing from a county shifts from its current DMA assignment to broadcast stations from another DMA, that shift must be statistically significant and occur for 2 consecutive years. Nielsen instituted the DMA system in the mid-1960s to measure the number of viewers in a particular area, and more specifically, to connect sellers and buyers of advertising. The DMA allowed for the creation of a market where buyers and sellers of local television advertising could do business with each other based on impartial information provided by a third party. Advertisers need to know that their ads are directed at audiences they want to serve. The TV Advertising Bureau estimates that in Q1 of this year, ad spending in the U.S. was almost $18 billion, with an estimate of $72 billion for the entire year. That's a market that fuels the great entertainment and news programs that this country produces and watches. With the emergence of cable and satellite television in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the landscape of the industry changed. The new technology allowed companies that carried television programming to expand their boundaries. Specifically, television stations were previously limited to being viewed within a local DMA and could not be seen outside of those boundaries. And while new technologies open up new horizons, they also create new problems for the television industry. The industry needed rules to determine which local stations could be carried in which local markets, and it turned to the federal government for help. In 1992, Congress and the FCC established rules governing which local television stations could be carried in which local markets. As part of that process, Nielsen's designated market areas were adopted as a guideline for determining which local stations could be carried. It should be noted that Nielsen did not recommend the use of the DMAs for this purpose, nor were we asked for technical assistance on the use of the DMAs. It was a decision that was made entirely by Congress. Finally, As you work to learn more about the future trends in video use, we'd be happy to assist you in any way we can. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Donato, and congratulations. You beat the illumination of the red light. Pressure on you, Mr. Dodge. Needless to say, gentlemen, your entire statements will be made part of the record. Mr. Dodge?
Thank you. Chairman Goodlatte, Chairman Coble, Ranking Member Conyers, Ranking Member Watt, and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. My name is Stanton Dodge, and I am the General Counsel of DISH Network. DISH is the nation's third largest pay TV provider with more than 14 million subscribers and over 25,000 employees. And we're the only provider of local television service in all 210 local DMAs. DISH's award-winning innovations include the Hopper DVR and TV Everywhere features that consumers can use to have greater choice and control over their viewing experience. DISH pays billions of dollars a year for the right to distribute programming to our subscribers and fully supports fair compensation to copyright holders. As the subcommittee examines the video marketplace, we believe that outdated laws need to be updated comprehensively to reflect changes in the market and changes in how consumers view their content. Public policy should support the preservation and expansion of consumer video choices. Unfortunately, as distributors like DISH offer advances in technology, some programmers are again crying wolf, saying at this time the threat is real and they won't be able to survive the onslaught of innovation. The challenges to our Hopper DVR are a perfect example. We believe in consumer choice, and to preserve and expand it, I want to make 3 points. First, we believe Congress should protect consumers against a growing problem of blackouts caused by retransmission consent disputes. The proof is in the numbers. In 2010, there were 12 blackouts. In 2011, there were 51. In 2012, the number soared to almost 100, and the pace has yet to level off. So far in 2013, we've had 84 blackouts, which puts us on track for a record-setting year of 120. Making matters worse, the length of the blackouts and the number of consumers impacted are increasing. The consumers are the real victims of these one-sided negotiations. Their programming gets pulled by the broadcasters and their monthly bills go up. Of increasing concern, some broadcasters are coordinating their negotiations with each other and colluding rates that they demand from video distributors like DISH. The American Television Alliance, a coalition whose membership encompasses cable, satellite, and telco providers, independent programmers, and public interest groups, and of which DISH is a member, is unified in calling for changes to the outdated retransmission consent rules as part of the Stellar reauthorization. We and many others in the industry propose, among other things, that when a local network station is pulled from a consumer due to a retransmission consent dispute, that video distributors should be able to provide another market's network signal. The broadcaster whose signal is imported would be compensated under the established distant signal royalty rate, and this reform will at least allow consumers to keep their network programming while negotiations continue. If the broadcaster's local content is as valuable as they assert, then the imported distant network signal is a poor substitute, and both parties will continue to have every incentive to reach an agreement. Importing a distant signal during a blackout simply fills the void for network programming. Second, Americans living in remote, underserved areas have especially benefited from Stella and its predecessors. Among other things, Stella allows Americans residing in predominantly rural areas to receive distant network signals for any missing Big Four stations in their market. The distant signal license sunsets at the end of 2014, and without reauthorization, 1.5 million American households will be disenfranchised. Third, in the 3 years since the last reauthorization, the video industry has not been sitting still. Consumers can and increasingly want to watch news, sports, and entertainment on the go. Using increasingly high-resolution screens available on their smartphones and tablets. Over the years, DISH has done much to respond to changing consumer preferences. And today, DISH stands ready to make a significant investment in the wireless market to satiate consumers' growing demand for increased mobility and flexibility in consuming video. In summary, we believe the government should work to ensure its laws mirror today's competitive realities, consumer expectations, and advances in technology. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. Mr. Waldron, and I commend you as well for beating the illuminating light, Mr. Dodge. Thank you. Pressure on you, Mr. Waldron.
Good morning, Chairman Coble, Ranking Member Watt, Chairman Goodlatte, and Ranking Member Conyers, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jerry Waldron. I'm a partner with the law firm of Covington Burling, and I'm testifying here today on behalf of the more than 1,000 free local over-the-air television members of the National Association of Broadcasters. As the committee begins its review of Stella, your broadcast constituents urge you to keep in mind two principles. First, free, locally focused broadcast television should remain available to American households. Second, your review of Stella should not be used to create new exceptions to copyright law that undermine those contractual relationships between broadcasters and satellite or cable companies that enable broadcasting's local focus. Why is localism so important? For broadcasters, localism is coverage of local news, severe weather and emergency alerts, school closings, high school sports, local elections, and public affairs. Localism is support for charities, civic organizations, and events that help create a sense of community. Our broadcast stations are also the way that local businesses educate and inform the public about the goods and services, and in turn, create jobs and support your economies. There is no doubt that viewers, your constituents, continue to rely on our service. Broadcast television remains unique because it is free, it is local, and it is always on, even when other forms of communications may fail. As a threshold matter, the subcommittee should ask whether the expiring Section 119 distant signal license continues to promote localism and whether it is in the public interest. It could be argued that the distant signal license served its purpose in 1988, when the backyard satellite industry was just getting started, and that it served its purpose again when Dish and DirecTV first launched their small receiver services in the mid-1990s. But in 2013, when Dish and DirecTV are two of the largest three pay TV providers in the country, the distant signal license is a vestige of a bygone era. Today, over 98% of all U.S. television households can view their local network affiliates by satellite, and that number is growing all the time. No public policy justifies treating satellite subscribers in local and local markets as unserved, which would deprive viewers of the benefits of locally focused service. As Dish has demonstrated, there are no technical reasons for failing to serve all markets. Accordingly, the subcommittee should continue to encourage localism and consider whether the Section 119 license should expire. In re-examining Stella, you are likely to hear from those seeking enactment of new exceptions to the copyright laws that would undermine broadcasters' retransmission consent rights. Let me be clear. Arguments that broadcasters have too much leverage in the retransmission consent process or that retransmission fees are directly responsible for rising cable bills are wrong. Local broadcasters and pay TV providers both have an incentive to complete retransmission consent negotiations. And for that simple reason, they always do, before any disruption to viewers occurs. There are exceptions, but they are rare. And in fact, carriage disruptions from retransmission consent impasses represent 1/100th of 1% of all annual U.S. television viewing hours. Put that another way, consumers are 20 times more likely to lose television programming service because of a power outage than because of a retransmission consent impasse. Furthermore, in the small number of instances where these negotiations have resulted in disruptions to consumers, there is one distinct pattern: the involvement of Time Warner Cable, DirecTV, and Dish. Since 2012, these three companies alone have been party to 89% of all the disruptions nationwide. In contrast to what some suggest, NEB has demonstrated across numerous economic studies that retransmission consent payments are not responsible for high and rising pay TV prices. Just 2 cents of every cable bill dollar goes to broadcast retransmission consent fees. And that is true in spite of the fact that during the 2011 season, 96 of the top 100 most watched primetime programs were on broadcast television. Lastly, the committee should understand that retransmission consent negotiations are about more than just fees. Increasingly, these negotiations include hard discussions about how we can distribute our content across a variety of new platforms, such as Hulu, that promote competition. In conclusion, your local broadcast constituents urge you to rebuff calls from the pay TV industry to expand the narrow examination of Stella solely to give them an unfair leverage in market-based negotiations. Thank you for your time. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Waldron. Mr. McKenzie?
Good morning. Shentel offers wireline and wireless services.
Mr. McKenzie, your mic's not on.
Sorry. Good morning. Shentel offers wireline and wireless services to residential and business customers in smaller markets and rural areas in the Mid-Atlantic region. As a smaller rural provider, our costs per subscriber are greater. However, despite the higher costs, firms like Shentel still provide our customers with the same service enjoyed by urban customers. It's a challenge that's not made any easier by certain laws and rules that govern our business. For example, one of the simplest issues I'd raise for the committee today is the competitive disparity that stems from the fact that certain laws governing the satellite TV industry are reauthorized every 5 years. The cable industry does not benefit from such periodic review. In fact, Congress hasn't made a broad legislative change to the cable rules since the 1990s. If Congress was to conduct such a review, one set of rules that has worked and should not be changed is the cable copyright license. It continues to serve its goal in compensating copyright holders for the retransmission of their work. Many stakeholders agree no significant change to the license is necessary. If Congress were to repeal the license, it would be very burdensome for the cable firms to anticipate all the copyrighted works that would need to be cleared before they are aired on broadcast stations. Moreover, the repeal would create uncertainty in the marketplace for us and our customers. Should Congress reach a different conclusion, any change to the existing license must coincide with reform to the broadcast carriage rules, such as retransmission consent, because they are legally intertwined. There are a number of specific problems related to the outdated rules and regulations governing the cable industry, particularly retransmission consent, that are covered in my written testimony. But with limited time, I'll focus on just 2 that are direct relevance to the Judiciary Committee. This committee should be aware that there are dozens of instances where separately owned Big Four broadcasters in the same market are colluding against the cable operator with their negotiation retransmission consent. Typically, this means that 2 broadcast stations with exclusive market rights that are protected by the government use the same negotiator to conduct the negotiations. Available evidence show this anti-competitive conduct by broadcasters raises fees between 22 and 160%. In the end, these costs are passed on to the consumer. The practice of coordinating retransmission consent negotiations is widespread, occurred in at least 20% of the TV station markets, and it's increasing. This year, there's been a number of broadcast station mergers and acquisitions that could result in even more coordination of retransmission consent negotiations. If you share my concerns, please inform the Department of Justice. Another area that I'd like the committee to consider are skyrocketing sport programming fees. It's amazing in the past few years, Sports League has extracted more than $110 billion from broadcast and cable TV networks, and there's no end in sight. These networks bid extraordinary amounts because they can pass those costs on to the pay TV providers and our customers. Not surprisingly, ESPN, regional sports networks, and the Big Four broadcasters are aggressively hiking their fees. In the end, the consumer shoulders these costs. One part of the sports programming problem is rooted in a 50-year-old federal law giving an antitrust exemption to professional sports leagues when they're negotiating their TV programming deals. However, like retransmission consent, sports programming market has changed significantly since JFK was president, but the rules have not. While it may have made sense to give professional sports league a pass from the antitrust rules in 1961, their dominant market power no longer justifies this exemption. Mr. Chairman, it's clear that there's a host of issues that need attention. Given the significant changes in the marketplace, I hope the issues I've raised here will be taken into consideration as part of the committee's reauthorization of the satellite TV license. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Mr. Campbell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Watt, Chairman Goodlatte, and Ranking Member Conyers. Appreciate you giving CenturyLink the opportunity to testify before this subcommittee as a relatively new entrant into the video marketplace. And I would echo Mr. Dodge's testimony that CenturyLink is certainly not seeking to avoid paying reasonable costs for acquisition of broadcast content. Rather, we seek a fair set of rules by which that cannot be unfairly leveraged against both consumers and new entrants like us. Give you a little background, CenturyLink's the third largest telecommunications company in the United States, offering voice, video, and data to over 14 million homes in 37 states and businesses in all 50 states and select national markets. We offer cybersecurity solutions to the federal government and multiple state and local governments. And as a result of our recent acquisition of Savvis, we are actually one of the largest cloud computing and hosting companies in the world. Only recently, over the past 5 years, have we gotten involved in the competitive video market, launching a fully digital IPTV product in multiple markets, including Orlando, Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Central North Carolina. And I'll tell you, consumers benefit from robust competition in the form of better service quality, in the form of more innovation, more investment, and ultimately lower rates. But unfortunately, the cost of obtaining broadcast content has threatened consumers' ability to get any of these benefits. The current regulatory regime was created in an environment where the federal lawmakers were concerned about market abuse from monopoly incumbent cable operators. As a result, over the years, lawmakers have kind of skewed the regulatory advantages towards broadcasters vis-a-vis their relationship with pay TV providers in multiple ways. For example, one, a local broadcaster, because of tie-down arrangements, can force-feed unwanted content to providers regardless of consumer demand. Two, a provider has no other alternative to obtain this content in most of these markets. And third, the FCC's application and interpretation of the good faith standard has rendered it really meaningless, giving de facto power to the broadcasters in retransmission consent negotiations. In addition, the regulatory regime, as has been stated, did not contemplate the explosion of video competition from a myriad of industries. Incumbent cable operators no longer have a monopoly in the market. And while the current rules create problems for the larger companies, they impose additional burdens on new entrants like CenturyLink. Every customer we get had a relationship with another provider before they come to us. We have to win every single customer we sign up. That's capital intensive, it's tough sledding, and for that reason, we can't simply just take whatever the broadcasters' demands are. In the case of a blackout, and I know the broadcasters have used this more frequently, there's little harm to the broadcasters if the signal is lost, but tremendous amount of harm to a company like CenturyLink as we try and provide competitive service. And unfortunately, the retransmission consent fees are providing a windfall not to the local stations, but to national networks. The original intent of these rules were to provide a safety net for true local stations. It's not the case anymore. S&L Kagan projects that retransmission fees will increase to $6.1 billion in 2018, up from $2.4 billion in 2012. That's a 250% increase, and that's all at the expense of consumers. Congress has an opportunity as part of the Stellar reauthorization to reform and rebalance the negotiation process regarding the retransmission consent marketplace. The reasons Congress conferred significant regulatory advantage to the broadcasters no longer exist. CenturyLink favors a deregulatory approach where our consumers could receive national content from adjacent or alternate markets during the pendency of negotiations should they break down. This is good for two reasons. One, it rebalances the negotiation process where both parties have a little bit more leverage at the table. And two, and most importantly, it does not punish consumers for two providers' failure to reach an agreement. At the end of the day, it's not about winners and losers. It's about protecting consumers who bear the biggest brunt of this regulatory problem and ensuring the future of a competitive marketplace in the video marketplace. Again, I thank you again for the opportunity to testify. We look forward to working with the committee and try and enact and enable consumer-oriented legislative reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Mr. Garrett.
Thank you, Chairman Coble, Ranking Member Watt. Thanks for the opportunity to testify on behalf of Major League Baseball this morning. Let me summarize that testimony with 3 brief points. First, baseball has a major stake in any revision of the copyright laws that affect television programming, including the cable and satellite compulsory licenses. Baseball and its member clubs are copyright owners of a substantial amount of very entertaining and very valuable television programming. They now offer their fans access to approximately 5,000 copyrighted telecasts of Major League Baseball games each year. I do not believe that there is any single copyright owner that provides the American public with more television programming than Major League Baseball. Second, the vast, overwhelming majority of baseball's telecasts are provided to cable and satellite subscribers pursuant to licenses negotiated in the free marketplace and not pursuant to compulsory licensing. There is simply no reason that satellite carriers or cable systems or anyone else require a compulsory license to provide Major League Baseball telecast or any other broadcast television programming. Satellite carriers and cable systems negotiate every day in the free marketplace to offer hundreds of channels, tens of thousands of hours of non-broadcast television programming. We believe that they can do the same to offer broadcast programming, including telecast of baseball games. Third and finally, if Congress nevertheless chooses to reauthorize the Section 119 compulsory license, baseball has one simple request, and that is adopt a mechanism to ensure that satellite carriers and cable systems, at the very least, pay fair market value for their compulsory licenses. According to the FCC, cable systems derive more than $67 billion in revenues by selling access to video programming. Compulsory licensing royalties amount to less than 0.5% of those revenues. 0.5% for what is undoubtedly the most valuable, the most watched of all the programming that the cable systems offer. Satellite carriers also pay less than 0.5% of their revenues for their compulsory license. Their video revenues amount to approximately $36 billion. Their compulsory licensing royalties in 2012 amounted to approximately $87 million, or about $10 million less than when Congress last renewed the Section 119 license. The current satellite royalty rate is in fact the same as the rate that an independent panel of arbitrators determined to be fair market value in 1997, 16 years ago. There's simply no justification for requiring copyright owners to subsidize with below-market royalty rates the major corporate entities that dominate the cable and satellite industries. Baseball believes that Congress should authorize the Copyright Board to set rates for the carriage of all broadcast programming under the cable and satellite compulsory licenses, and that the Copyright Royalty Board also should be authorized to adjust those rates periodically so that they continue to provide fair market compensation to copyright owners. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and baseball also looks forward to working with you and your subcommittee on this important matter.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Mr. Padden?
Chairman Coble, Ranking Member Watt, Chairman Goodlatte, and Ranking Member Conyers. My name is Preston Padden. Yes. I appear today on my own behalf, and sadly, no one is paying me to be here. I am so old that I am one of the few living souls who's been around for the entire history of this issue. And I'm here today to implore you not to just kick the can down the road again. It is long past time to repeal the satellite and cable compulsory licenses and the Rube Goldberg-like statutory and regulatory system that surrounds them. As the former president of the ABC television network, I know how TV program rights are negotiated. I promise you that the earth will continue to spin, consumers will continue to have access to TV, and all TV industry sectors will continue to thrive without the compulsory licenses, without the associated FCC rules, and without retransmission consent. In 1976, when the cable TV industry was in its infancy, Congress granted cable an extraordinary exception from normal copyright principles, a compulsory copyright license to distribute the programs on broadcast TV channels. The FCC adopted rules, including network non-duplication and syndicated exclusivity, to limit the market disruption caused by the new compulsory license. In 1988, the compulsory license was extended to satellite. Then in 1992, Congress enacted retransmission consent requiring a marketplace negotiation between broadcast TV stations and cable and satellite distributors, a negotiation that is the functional equivalent of the negotiation that would have been required if the compulsory licenses had never been enacted in the first place. When others argue that the compulsory licenses are essential, please consider this. Every day, hundreds of non-broadcast TV channels, channels like Discovery, History Channel, USA Network, Bravo, and HBO, get distributed to nearly every man, woman, and child in America without any compulsory license and without retransmission consent. They get distributed because the channel owner and the cable and satellite systems have an old-fashioned, simple copyright negotiation. There is absolutely no reason why the broadcast channels cannot be distributed in exactly the same way. When the satellite license was adopted in 1988, you provided a sunset and expressed the expectation that the license would be temporary and would be replaced by market negotiations. Instead, the license has been renewed 4 times. When you renewed it in 2004, you directed the Register of Copyrights to study the continued need for compulsory licensing. In 2008, the Register released that study, calling the cable and satellite compulsory licenses, and I quote, arcane, antiquated, complicated, and dysfunctional. Not exactly a ringing endorsement. When you renewed the satellite license again in 2010, you directed the Register of Copyrights to prepare a more specific report to Congress, proposing mechanisms and methods for the phase-out and eventual repeal of the cable and satellite compulsory licenses. And you asked the Register to propose marketplace alternatives. The Register issued that report in 2011, concluding that the compulsory licenses are, and I quote again, an artificial construct created in an earlier era. The Register further recommended that Congress set a date-specific trigger to phase out and ultimately repeal the licenses. I want to close with what I think are 3 simple truths. First, compulsory licensing is just not necessary in these markets. Second, broadcast channels, like non-broadcast channels, absolutely deserve to be paid by the cable and satellite distributors who want to sell their programming to consumers. And lastly, local broadcast channels are no more a monopoly than are the non-broadcast channels like AMC, Time Warner Cable Sportsnet, Bravo, and Discovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Patton. I want to thank you, the witnesses, for your timely testimony, staying within the 5-minute rule. We try to apply the 5-minute rule to ourselves as well, so if you could be terse in your answer, we would be appreciative to you for that. Mr. Garrett, how is Major League Baseball working to make its content available to Americans in new ways with advanced technology?
Mr. Chairman, as I indicated in my testimony, Major League Baseball currently offers approximately 5,000 telecasts of its games to consumers each season. That is, virtually every single game that is played during the course of the season is made available to Major League Baseball's fans. They do it in a variety of ways. They've done it over national broadcast television networks such as Fox. They do it over a myriad of local broadcast stations and regional sports networks throughout the country. They do it over several cable networks, including ESPN, TBS, the Major League Baseball Network. They make a number of these programs available via their out-of-market packages that are carried by cable systems and satellite carriers to almost 67 million households across the United States. And finally, they also make it available via their very successful, award-winning MLB.TV app, which makes all of these telecasts available to anyone with an internet-connected device, over 350 different devices.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dodge, for our constituents, on what issues should they be asking the Congress to place its focus upon?
If there's one issue that's top of mind for DISH is its that the retransmission consent system today is broken. It's not a free market. In every local market around the country, you know, in the old days when cable was in its infancy, you had one broadcaster who would negotiate with one cable company, and there was somewhat a symbiotic relationship or mutual assured destruction, depending on how you looked at it. And today, that one broadcaster plays 3 or 4 distributors off against each other, and ultimately, it's consumers who are caught in the crosshairs and are hurt by losing their signals and having their prices go up year after year.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Patton, I think you've touched on this. In your opinion, what would be the result if Section 119 license simply expires, which I think is some December of next year?
My recommendation is that Congress provide a short transition period to allow the broadcast industry to get its rights in order and then repeal all of these licenses. And all that would happen is the broadcast programming would get distributed exactly the same way the non-broadcast programming is distributed today, through a simple negotiation between the cable and satellite companies on the one hand and the local station on the other hand, with the station acting as a rights aggregator, just as the non-broadcast channels do today.
I still have time. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Sure. I think what Mr. Patton suggests, it's very similar to a bill that's been proposed by Representative Scalise over at the Energy and Commerce Committee, and it's certainly one potential option, very worthy of debate. And you know, we're just thrilled at DISH that there does appear to be a recognition that there is a problem and that there should be such a debate.
If I may add, I think the Section 119 license expiring, this committee could advance the debate by actually getting a number as to how many people would be affected. So I would suggest that the committee ask the satellite carriers to submit a certified number as to how many people today are getting distant signal. In the past, we've heard 1%, we've heard 1 million, but we do not know what the number is. And I think if the committee would get that information, then you would actually we could have a serious debate about, is this distant signal license worthwhile to extend for this small number of people? There may be some hardship cases, there may be special circumstances which justify it, but right now, we're all in a blind alley.
Time for one more comment.
Well, in response to that, I would say it is true that there are less and less folks who are actually availing themselves of the distant network signal license today, but it's a very important group of rural and underserved Americans, and for example, in short markets, like Glendive, Montana, that doesn't have an ABC or a Fox affiliate. And what the distant network signal license allows us to do is import those stations and network programming to those folks who otherwise would have no access to that.
And we would be happy to have a conversation about short markets and areas where there's a spot beam problem, but we just do not know what the nature of it is. So that would be a helpful step in promoting legislation.
How many people use it, Mr. Dodge?
The estimates I've heard are 1 to 1.5 million consumers.
I see my amber light appear, so I now recognize the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Watt, for his questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and has become my policy. I've decided to defer until the end of the process, so I'll defer to Mr. Conyers and go last in the chain.
Thank you very much. Could I begin our discussion? And I thank you for the variety of views presented, but do you believe, Mr. Dodge and Mr. Patton, that Congress should do more than simply reauthorize the distant signal license? Either one can start off.
I'm happy to go first. As I've said, I think this is one government program that you can retire. It was enacted, these licenses were enacted before there were any non-broadcast channels. They only apply to the programming on the broadcast channels, and you now have hundreds of other channels distributed nationwide with no muss, no fuss, through normal copyright negotiations, and I think that proves that you don't need these licenses anymore for the broadcast programming.
And to address that specific point, I believe there is a difference between cable channels and the local broadcasters. The chief difference being the local broadcasters received, at least initially, billions of dollars of spectrum for free under the promise that they would be stewards of that spectrum and use it for the public good. And they're further propped up by rules such as must carry, syndicated exclusivity, network non-duplication that the cable channels don't have the benefit of. And to your specific question, Ranking Member Conyers, we think that the Satellite Act should be reauthorized so that the current beneficiaries are not disenfranchised. And further, we think there are two reasonable zones of expansion that should be considered, one of which is fixing the broken retransmission consent system as it stands today, and the other is fixing the orphan county problem that, at least in my case, every time around this year, the folks in 2 southwest counties in Colorado start asking the question of why they can't watch the Broncos, and the reason is because they're in the Albuquerque DMA.
Well, Mr. Dodge and Mr. Padden, do I sense that there is a little space between both your responses?
Yes, although we are good friends.
Well, we're all friends here.
Yes,
That's
Ranking Member
understood.
Conyers, this committee asked the expert agency, the Register of Copyrights, to study these licenses, and their report said, and again I'll quote, that they're arcane, antiquated, complicated, and dysfunctional. I can't imagine why you would want to continue such a program.
Now, I'm going to give you another chance, Mr. Dodge. What are the targeted fixes that the American Television Alliance, ATVA, is calling for to the retransmission consent rules as part of the Stella reauthorization?
Well, principally there are two. The first of which is one that we favor, which is allowing video providers to import a distant signal on an interim basis during the pendency of retransmission disputes when the broadcaster takes down the programming. The other would be some form of standstill where the programming stays up and then the parties would be enter binding baseball-style arbitration to reach a fair rate. But in each of those cases, the consumers would still have access to the programming, and theoretically, the broadcasters in the first instance would still have an incentive to negotiate, as would the TV provider, because the distant signal is an imperfect solution.
Would you add to that, Mr. Waldron?
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. In terms of it, I think it is clear that there are thousands of cable systems in America. There are thousands of broadcasters in America. And the vast majority of time the system works, there is a marketplace settlement. There are marketplace negotiations. The fact is, as I mentioned in my testimony, there have been an increase in disruptions, and they all involve 3 companies, DirecTV, Dish, and Time Warner. We see this, frankly, as a manufactured crisis. They are deliberately going and playing the game, and frankly, in order to get this committee to pay attention to these issues. So we actually think in the vast majority of cases, the system is working. And with respect to the suggestion of a standstill, well, there's another way of putting that. They get to take my copyright without my permission. That is what a standstill is. I do not want to give them my retransmission consent, but yet they get to take it because they were taking it before, and I don't want to give it to them anymore. That seems rather contrary to our copyright law tradition. So we think that actually it would be not something that Congress should endorse.
Could I add
Yes.
just one thing? In evaluating the requests being made by the cable and satellite industry for a standstill provision, I think you should consider the fact that the cable industry just went to court and successfully defeated a standstill agreement in program access disputes. So they went to court and got rid of the standstill when they didn't want to continue to carry something, and now they're back here asking you to enact a standstill against the broadcasters.
And may I quickly...
Mr. Campbell, the last comment.
Thank you, Ranking Member Conyers. The companies that Mr. Weldon mentioned are very large, and we're a new entrant into the market. And I would suggest that often these larger companies play the negotiations against smaller companies like CenturyLink trying to compete and win customers over. And without any leverage at all, we are the ones that are getting kind of swallowed up in this thing, and that's going to stifle competition, investment, and innovation. The other thing I would point out is, while the broadcasters often threaten to black out, it's unlawful for any provider to not carry the signals during sweeps week, which is the week that broadcasters get their ratings and make their advertising money. That's the 1 week we can't put it up.
Mr. Chairman, can I get 30 seconds more? Mr. Dodge wants.
30 seconds will be granted.
Thank you. I just wanted to address one point made by Mr. Waldron, which is that 90% of the blackouts are caused by 3 entities, my company included. And I guess that's a bit in the eye of the beholder, because we would, of course, take the view that 100% of the blackouts are caused by 4 companies, ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, and their affiliates. But putting that aside for the moment, if you look at the facts, it's not surprising that Dish, DirecTV, and Time Warner Cable represent, as they assert, 90% of the blackouts because, one, we represent 50% of the marketplace for pay TV today. The other 25% is Comcast, which owns NBC, arguably is conflicted, and the remaining 25% is folks like Mr. Campbell. So in many ways, Dish, DirecTV, and Time Warner are the only folks who are actually able to negotiate effectively with the broadcasters, and thank goodness we're out there fighting for consumers to lower prices.
Thank you, Chairman Coble.
Indeed, welcome, Mr. Conyers. The distinguished gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Donato, I want to ask you a question on behalf of my constituents. I have a number of them that I hear from who live in usually a rural area, a good distance from the market that they're in, and a lot closer to another market that they prefer to receive the broadcast signal from or the retransmission of that. And I wonder if you might just elaborate on that. These are often lots of people, but living in rural areas who are, 75 miles from the D.C. market, but 25 miles from the small Harrisonburg market would rather have the Harrison market.
Right. From time to generally each year there's a few markets in which that kind of a situation happens. The DMA is what it is. It was created to reflect the viewing of people in that county. So the particular counties that you're talking about, as I said in my testimony, the predominance of viewing is actually to the home market that it's currently in. Again, it was developed as a mechanism to define a geography in which television signals are viewed, and therefore local advertisers would be able to use local television, support local television.
Should those lines be adjusted? Do you
have
adjust them?
Yeah, we have an
a
analysis process. Every year we go through, and we evaluate the viewing for each county within the DMA. It is perhaps a little bit conservative in that you've got to have a statistically significant change 2 years in a row before we move the county over. But the reason for that is the need for stability in the marketplace overall on the advertiser's behalf. There's always better ways of doing things. We generally treat these situations on a case-by-case basis. We often meet with congressmen when in their district there's an issue, and we describe what the numbers are. And so it's a system upon which almost $40 billion worth of advertising has been based successfully for the last 50 years.
Let me interrupt you, and I want to ask a couple other questions that are of a broader nature. But before I do that, I want to ask Mr. Garrett if he wants to respond to Mr. McKenzie's suggestion that the sports broadcast antitrust exemption should be eliminated.
Mr. Chairman, actually, I don't have a response. There's nobody who comes to me and asks for advice on antitrust laws. My focus is on copyright law and what's good copyright policy. And
well, in light of that, I'll cut you short then and ask if you work with and represent people who might have an opinion
absolutely
on that subject, and if they would submit that to the chairman of the committee in writing, I'd be pleased if the chairman would share that answer with me when it arrives. Let me ask all of the members of the panel, what is the proper role for Congress in responding to marketplace disputes? In order to resolve disputes, should Congress set general guidelines for the marketplace to follow, or should it set detailed requirements that all participants must follow? And then as an adjunct to that, are there ways for business disputes to occur and be resolved without disrupting the consumers who rely upon satellite and cable services for access to video content? And Mr. Donato, I gave you a shot at it. I'll start with Mr. Dodge, and we'll work our way down. If we have time, we'll get back to you.
So to answer, I'll take your second question first, and I'd say the ways to avoid consumers being disrupted are the two ways I said earlier, which is one, allow us to import a distance signal during the pendency of these disputes or some mechanism for a standstill. And I have to say I'm not all that familiar with the niceties of what standstills have and haven't been struck down over the time, but the fact of the matter is, if the broadcasters are going to sit here and wrap themselves in localism as a justification for about 99% of what they're saying, why do they want to take the signal down and disenfranchise consumers at these times? Leave the signal up. We're not saying we're not going to pay during those periods. We gladly will, but don't disenfranchise the consumer.
You just got to keep moving because limited time.
2 points. One is that Congress actually, I think, wisely decided in 1992 to essentially have the marketplace settle these issues. And secondly, where there are problems, frankly, consumers should have more choice. So it is sometimes difficult to change your provider. There were reports, news reports, that people wanted to change the Time Warner, but nobody was answering the phone. And there are cancellation penalties and the like. So that actually would enhance the marketplace competition.
Mr. McKenzie,
I think our position is that...
hit the button.
Excuse me. Our position is general guidelines would be better than specific guidelines. Mr. Dodge has come up with 2 ideas, the distant signal and also kind of preventing the blackouts. Distant signal really doesn't work for the cable industry because we don't already have that content. The satellite industry already has that content and can quickly move it. For us, it would be building fiber and trying to get it off air, which would be impossible. So from our standpoint, preventing the blackout by leaving the signal on while we negotiate would be preferable.
Mr. Campbell?
Not to repeat what's been said, I agree with Mr. Dodge and Mr. McKenzie, but to return
Well,
to
hit the button too.
was it not on? Apologize, but much better. To return the negotiations to actual free market negotiations, we hear a lot about the thumb on the scale in favor of one party over the other. We don't seek to have the thumb put on the scale in our favor. We would just rather have it removed from the other side so that the negotiations do become, once again, free market negotiations, because the world's changed a lot since '92.
Thank you. Mr. Garrett?
From Major League Baseball's standpoint, they license a great deal of programming that they want their consumers, they want their fans to see. And they are as frustrated as anyone, either here in Congress or the fans themselves, when that programming is not made available. Having said that, we also recognize that broadcasters have property rights in those signals. And we believe the best way to determine the value of those property rights is through free marketplace negotiations. And that is the objective that we in baseball have, is to have free marketplace negotiations, or at the very least, fair market value compensation for the programming that is being utilized.
Thank you. Mr. Padden?
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Patton, you may respond.
If I could, I'd like to respond briefly to your question to Nielsen about the DMA. This is an example of the dysfunction that is built into the compulsory license and the associated FCC rules. In a free market, if you have constituents who want to see Station A, and Station A would like constituents to see it, and there's a distributor between them that would like to make money distributing it, they can figure it out. All the non-broadcast channels get distributed anywhere someone wants to see them. The problem is the compulsory license and the associated FCC rules actually enshrined Nielsen's rating data from 1972 as the basis for what signals can go where. They're still sitting in the FCC rules, 1972 ratings data. And if you would just get a big broom and sweep all of this stuff away, the free market could better serve your constituents.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dodge, I understand that, well, in fact, you said earlier that 1 to 1.5 million households in the United States currently get their access to broadcast stations through the distant signal service. But it's clear that the number of households that are dependent on the distant signal decreases every time Congress looks into reauthorizing Section 119. Can you tell us who these remaining 1 to 1.5 million households are and where they're located? Are they mostly located in rural areas, or are they concentrated in certain parts of the country?
Generally located in rural and underserved areas, and there's really 4 categories, if you will, of consumers. Folks in short markets who are folks such as Glendive, Montana, that's missing a Fox and an ABC, where we're allowed to import those network affiliates into those markets. Outside the spot beam of our satellites, so if you think of Utah, for example, which is a rectangle, our spot beams are generally round, and so the law allows us to provide distant signals to the folks that aren't covered by our spot beams. Commercial trucks and RVs are covered by the distant signal license, and then DirecTV, we're in all 210 markets, so we don't actually make use of the, quote, traditional unserved household exception to allowing a distant signal import, but DirecTV does, because I believe there's still 15 markets where they don't provide local service, and then they have some grandfathered subscribers as well, I believe.
And do we have that technology now to close the gap to them?
For example, the short market issue is just purely a fact that there are no affiliates of a particular network in those markets. And with respect to outside of the spot beam, it depends on whether or not the satellite beam is large enough to actually cover an entire DMA, which it's not in all cases, but it's very, very limited when it's not.
Okay. Mr. Waldron, I'm aware that today consumers have several options for how they'll view video content. They can access the content through pay TV carriers or other options now through the internet. There's no doubt that the online model will continue to grow in the coming years. To what extent should we consider these newer platforms as we're reauthorizing satellite TV laws? Should we consider them at all?
Well, I think they can inform the debate because they show how the TV market is evolving. And let me also say that, you know, we've talked earlier about the conflict between CBS and Time Warner Cable. A significant part of that dispute was about the ability for CBS to offer its programming to a competitor to Time Warner Cable. Now, I understand why Time Warner Cable doesn't want CBS to make its programming available to a Hulu or a Netflix or an Amazon Instant Video. But CBS actually is interested in doing that to give consumers choice. So you should be aware that that is actually increasingly a matter of the negotiations, is not necessarily the fee, which news reports said was a deal that was cut relatively early in the process, but in fact, enabling broadcasters to actually giving consumers choice across these different platforms.
Well, in fact, the digital rights of content are playing a more important role in these retransmission negotiations. How do you think the issue of digital rights will impact future negotiations? And does Congress have a role in protecting consumers in this regard?
Well, I think Congress should actually say, as it has, that the copyright holders should be able to negotiate an agreement across all of their content. As I said, I think the CBS example is telling in that CBS wants to actually promote competition, so that's why they actually went about those negotiations. And we think that actually is a way that consumers can give choices. I do want to come back to a statement that Mr. Dodge said. We don't dispute that there are some hard cases out there, such as the short market situation or the corners of spot beams. But what we don't know is how many there are. And Mr. Dodge is one of two. So he said earlier he's heard that 1.5 million. Well, he has access to half of the information that is needed, and DirecTV has the other half. So it's not like you have to survey 1,000 companies in order to get this data. And what we would like to do is to get in what is the number and what is the context. How many are RVs? How many are in short markets? How many are spot beams problems? And as Dish has proven, there is no technology that there should be an unserved household. So Dish is in 100% of all the markets.
And can you address the issue of localism, the principle that is embedded in our nation's communication laws? Can you tell us how the law developed and to focus on localism and some of the benefits of holding on to that principle?
Sir, just quickly. So localism goes back to the original broadcast licenses. It's embedded in the Communications Act of 1934, and it is the notion that broadcasters should meet the needs of their local community. That makes American broadcasting unique around the world. There are national broadcast systems in Europe and in Asia. We have a locally focused broadcast system. The reason why we have concerns with the distant signal, it undermines that localism. The local broadcaster who is bringing the local car dealership, who is talking about the local high school sports or the tornado, if you are getting a signal in from New York or LA, you're not going to be aware in Moore, Oklahoma about the tornado that's coming. So localism is the heart of the broadcast, and it also is at the heart of the satellite laws, and we think that that actually is a strong argument why the committee should be skeptical that a distant signal license is still needed.
Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you very much. And having grown up as a broadcaster working in radio since I was 15 years old, I've kind of grew up with the public interest, convenience, and necessity standard. And I certainly have a great deal of sympathy for the local broadcasters. And I want to ask Mr. Dodge and maybe Mr. McKenzie, if we take away or limit the local TV stations' leverage with respect to negotiating a programming license by allowing distant signals, what leverage are they going to have in the negotiations?
Well, if you believe what they say, and localism is important as it is, then the distant signal is a imperfect solution. All it will do is ensure that folks continue to be able to watch American Idol, but they won't be getting their local news.
So what if I do think that that's important, Mr. Waldron. Maybe you can tell me some of the benefits that we're getting. I can't believe Jim Cantori is going to give me better hurricane information than the weathercaster we call Dead Wrong Dale affectionately in Corpus Christi.
Actually, that is exactly right. And look, we understand the market. We understand that people actually are tuning in on a daily basis for their American Idol or for their CBS or NBC hit show. But when the tornado comes, suddenly there will be an outcry. And I don't think you want to say, where is that local station the day after the tornado hits? So that is the point. That localism is about being there and serving the community all the time. And yes, much of the viewing is tuning in for.
Okay, so I mean, I've got limited time. So, Mr. McKenzie, can you tell me? Go ahead. Did you want to answer this?
Yeah, I would. The American Cable Association are primarily very small cable providers. Oftentimes, we're at the edge of a DMA.
Right.
So, yeah, I'll use my system as an example. We are in Shenandoah County, which is in the Washington, D.C. DMA. You cannot get off air in our area. We have to have that brought in by fiber to do so. So I can tell you there are no local sports, there are no local, but I can get that from a distant station, which is only 30 miles.
All right, so let's
away.
talk about Section 119. And if we do away with the requirements at local, or the incentives for local stations to get on, or the requirements, do we end up with network affiliate superstations where it's the station in New York or Chicago or LA that everyone gets? And then how does the local car dealer advertise for, or whatever business there is in the local community? The candidate for Congress.
I'm saying our view is that's absolutely what would happen. That the easiest thing for the carriers to do would be to make an arrangement with New York and Chicago and LA and broad that. And so then we would have a national broadcast system, which is how some other countries doing it. That's not the American system, and that is not it is not the case that actually it would give a platform for the car dealers or the movie theaters.
Right, so I'm sorry, I've got limited time. Mr. Donato.
Could I just say,
sure.
Why shouldn't consumers be able to choose in that case? It sounds like Mr. Waldron is proving the point that perhaps localism isn't that important. If a consumer is going to be satisfied with New York, shouldn't they make
But
that
isn't it much cheaper for you and uses less bandwidth and less resources for you on your satellite just to have one national? You do away with all the spot beams and all of that, and you just have one station, and it's actually cheaper for you to broadcast one affiliate rather than several hundred?
It certainly would be, but the fact of the matter is today we broadcast locals in all 210 markets. We've made the decision that we want to be in there, and all we're saying is to protect consumers from takedowns, allow us to temporarily import a distant signal. That's not the end game.
Well, would another option to the ones you suggested might be, all right, you stay up and you go under whatever agreement is eventually reached? Would that be?
Of course.
All right, Mr. Donato, we talk about these areas, these million or so
designated market areas.
Yeah, when we talk about the million or so people who aren't served by anybody, is there a way we set it up where they just, rather than fall, and even with the DMAs, we set it up to the one that's most rationally close to them? Isn't there just a way to start over and do away with the 1972 stuff? If I had my choice of local affiliates in Washington, D.C. on DirecTV, I'd pick the Corpus Christi local affiliate.
So the 1972 stuff that was what existed at the time the law was written, right. And that's why it's in the appendix, and no one's gone back to update it. And we would be delighted to supply the committee with updated information on it. And just so you understand what the implications are, pay penetration in 1972 was obviously less than 5%, or the amount of viewing that went to pay was less than 5%. And right now, the amount of viewing that goes to cable stations is about 65%. So there has been a shift. Typically, the counties in which it feels like it's irrational because you can't get the Broncos game are really large rural counties, and most of those people in those counties do, in fact, watch to the home market station. We do have split counties. We have split counties in the past, and that's why we don't.
My time is up. I've now got to go research whether or not watching my Corpus Christi stations on my Sling box is illegal. Got me a little concerned now. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, the distinguished gentleman from Florida. Mr. Dodge, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Padden, you have made an argument, fairly compelling argument, that the current the current retransmission system that's in place is it's incredibly complex, comically complex. I'm sure you would say, but your solution is to walk away, for us to walk away from that process altogether, which would bring all the broadcast stations into the free market, if I understand your proposal. And I appreciate your desire to take Congress out of this, and the full committee's chairman, I think, touched on this before. If you take Congress out of these business-to-business dealings, Congress is still going to be tipping the scales in favor of one party or the other, either by keeping compulsory licenses or by striking them. Why is walking away altogether a fair solution?
I think the best way to explain it is like this. First, you gave cable I'll say cable and satellite, a compulsory license for the programs on broadcast stations. Then as part of that deal, the FCC adopted rules that restrict cable and satellite's use of that compulsory license. And then in '92, Congress enacted retransmission consent, which requires a marketplace negotiation between the station and the cable and satellite people. So you ended up at the same place you would be, namely a marketplace negotiation, if you had done nothing, except you've got a bunch of regulatory warts that you developed along the way, like the fact that the 72 rules are still in the FCC's rules. All I'm saying is it's a Rube Goldberg system. It's a complex way to do something simple, and it really is a chance for once to say, here's a government program that each little step made sense when we did it, but the end result is nonsensical, so we're going to back out of it.
Right, Mr. Dodge, let's talk about regulatory warts for a second. I assume that you'd be in some disagreement with that proposal, but I'm hoping that you could walk us through the process that Dish undertakes to negotiate with local broadcasters. What makes that more difficult from your company's perspective than negotiating with the non-broadcast stations that Mr. Padden holds up as the model as to exactly how this should now work? As he points out, those negotiations all take place without any congressional interference at all. Why is there a difference? Why is it more difficult, and if so, why?
It is more difficult because you have these 210 small monopoly territories, if you will, where this one local broadcaster who, as Mr. Waldron asserts, has this valuable local content that's irreplaceable, that no one else can recreate. And that one broadcaster gets to play 3, if not 4, distributors off each other. And oftentimes you get to a point of negotiation where they're asking for 300-400% increase, and they say, okay, I guess we're not going to get there. I'm just going to take the signal down, and I'm going to call up your competitors and tell my consumers to go switch to them. And the problem is, well, the broadcaster might lose that eyeball for 30 days. Dish has lost a customer for eternity after the consumer goes through the headache of switching.
Mr. Dodge, can you just go through that in a little more detail, though? When you say they're playing several off of one another, can you give me some examples? How does that actually work? What is it that you would see happen?
So in some cases, the broadcasters will literally call up or start running advertisements in the paper saying, and crawling, putting into their signal that you're about to lose your signal from Dish Network. please call DirecTV or Comcast, whomever. They run advertisements in the local papers. And, you know, as Mr. Waldron says, maybe it's a smaller amount of these things that actually go to a takedown. What he doesn't account for is there are numbers of these where you do actually get to an 11th hour negotiation, but the consumers have been bombarded for weeks, if not a month, with all these advertisements and messages across the bottom of the screen saying, the sky is falling, you better switch now. So there's a huge disenfranchisement of consumers, even in cases where it doesn't actually go to a takedown.
Hey, Mr. Waldron?
Can I just say, let's take Mr. Dodge's statement, read it back, and swap out the word HBO for broadcaster. HBO doesn't want to reach a deal with the local cable company. HBO is going to pull back its programming. HBO is going to run an advertising to say that, oh, you want to watch HBO, you want to watch your favorite show, go to DirecTV because Dish doesn't have HBO. What is so remarkable about this? These are marketplace negotiations. To your point, Congressman, which you started out with, what is different about this, as Mr. Patton said, with every other sort of broadcasters? And the answer is Congress depends on HBO and Dish and DirecTV to have serious negotiations and to deal with the marketplace. That's the same exact thing that's going on here.
And if I may,
May I have 15 seconds just to hear the difference, Mr. Dodge?
so with respect to HBO, are there other movie channels out there? Yes, there are. Are there potential substitute programming? Yes, there is. Now let's substitute in what Mr. Waldron said. I guess localism isn't that important. We should be able to import New York because it's just not that important what's actually going on in Denver. And that's, he can't talk out of both sides of his mouth.
Gentleman's time's expired. The distinguished gentleman from Florida.
Mr. McKee, you wanted to chime in? Go ahead.
I would. I think the big difference between DirecTV and Dish and members of the American Cable Association are relative size. We're very small providers, normally with, on average, less than 5,000 subscribers. When we start our retransmission discussions with the broadcasters, it's after they have already negotiated with the big company that's in the DMA. When we try to make a negotiation, and on numerous occasions I've asked, could we have a most favored nations clause in our contract to make sure that we're being treated fairly compared to the others in the marketplace, and I've never been able to get that in. So I think there's a huge difference between the negotiations between a DirecTV and Dish and the broadcasters and the small cable operators and the broadcasters.
Great. Just wanted to give you a chance. This is my first time going around with this. I'm a freshman, but it is really interesting to see. I'm listening to the Major League Baseball testimony, and I'm one of the youngest members of Congress, but yet I remember watching there were 100 games about. We had TBS in Florida, TBS for the Braves, WGN for the Cubs, a little bit of White Sox. Then we did get WOR, so there were Mets games. So those are the people that I followed. And now, when they first came out, when ESPN started covering cable, you started to get more. And then with the internet, I remember when MLB TV came out, you could actually watch games at work. People thought that way. And now you can do it on your devices. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I think the technology is great. I wonder about the lost productivity in the American workforce. But I guess that's just a discussion for another time. So as someone who's new to this, I just like you all to say, because we're here. A lot of people say, Congress, they gotta solve the problems of the American public, all that, and that's nice to say, but it obscures the fact that we actually create a lot of problems here through the years, and I've seen it in other areas. And so, as somebody who's new looking at this, what would you say is kind of something that Congress has created a problem with this that we should look to rectify? I probably know where Mr. Patton's going, but can you start and then just give me a quick?
Sure. One perfect example is the compulsory license that you enacted gives cable systems the right to carry stations that are deemed significantly viewed in their county, based on a list of ratings from 1972 that is enshrined in the FCC rules. And if a station wants to get carried, somewhere else, and the constituents there want to see it, the station has to petition the FCC to amend the list of significantly viewed stations so they can be carried there. It's crazy. I mean, if you simply rely on the free market and there's people who want to see the station and the station wants to be seen, they'll figure out how to get it done.
Mr. Garrett?
Congressman DeSantis, there are probably several answers I could give. The one I would focus on for Major League Baseball here is the fact that entities like Major League Baseball and other content owners are forced to subsidize essentially a $100 billion industry by providing them with below-market programming pursuant to the compulsory license. You mentioned the great variety, the wealth of programming, baseball programming that you can see now. The vast bulk of that programming is made available through negotiated licenses, through marketplace negotiations. And we think that the same can be true of the programming that's now available during compulsory licensing, but if compulsory licenses continue, at the very least, we should have fair market value paid for that programming.
You mentioned the industry, but what is the dollar loss to Major League Baseball for, say? Have you looked at?
I don't know the answer to that. It's not a question of harm here. It's a question of talking about what's fair and reasonable, and that marketplace compensations, marketplace value is what we've all lived with in this industry.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Congressman DeSantis, thank you. Conceptually, I think that the biggest problem is that the rules that are currently in place don't recognize what the marketplace looks like today, and it's ever changing and ever evolving. I think the biggest thing that Congress could do would make sure that rules are in place that encourage innovation and investment and competition, because we're dealing with companies that have been there forever, and I think consumers benefit the most by having companies like Centrally go into a major market, invest the capital, and compete. And I think the rules in place would tend to stifle that. So I think conceptually that's what Congress should take a look at.
Very good. Mr. McKenzie?
Small rural carriers are the ones who are bringing broadband to America, which is, I know, a priority for everyone. But oftentimes the rules and regulations are one size fits all. And so I think one of the things that we should look at is some changes in the rules, or when the rules are being looked at, how it impacts the small providers.
I'm out of time, but if the rest of you gentlemen would like to submit something, I'd certainly love to hear your views as well. So thank you for coming.
Thank the gentleman from Florida, the distinguished lady from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and our witnesses today. I appreciate your time, and it's been helpful to me coming from Los Angeles and having just experienced the blackout, which again I thought was specific to our area and didn't really realize how widespread this was or why this happens. So I just had a couple of questions for you, and one of which is, do you worry that pulling consumers into these escalating negotiations between cable or satellite and broadcasters means that more people are going to opt out of pay TV? And whether or not you think this would have a harmful effect on content creators whose shows are distributed on cable and satellite, and that's for anybody.
Can I make one point? I
Sure.
want to emphasize that Broadcaster is a free over-the-air service.
Mm-hmm.
So during the so-called blackout, the service was available 100% of the time. I realize that some people might not have antennas, or some people might have reception problems, but I do want to emphasize.
So I could have seen CBS?
I'm sorry?
I could have seen CBS if I had
Yes,
rabbit ears?
absolutely, absolutely. It was available over the air during the entire time, and indeed there were reports, at least in the New York market, that there was a run on antennas at Radio Shack. So I do want to emphasize that this signal is always on and always up. It may not be available on the cable system, and we realize that, but it was available during this whole time.
Well, I would take a bit of an issue with that, as I don't think the broadcasters actually build out terrestrial signal to their entire DMA, certainly not in every DMA. So I think it depends where you lived in Los Angeles as to whether you could get an off-air signal.
I see. I don't think people knew that. I mean, I doubt whether there was a run on rabbit ears in
Not
LA.
telling people more.
Shame on broadcasters for not building out their entire DMAs.
Okay.
And from a pay provider perspective, it's not free. So.
Okay. But second question is, many local broadcast stations play an important role in providing local news, weather, and emergency information in particular to communities they serve. And I know that we all agree that viewers shouldn't be deprived of local information, especially during emergencies. So specifically, I wanted to ask, what steps can Congress take to ensure that our constituents don't get caught in the middle of these commercial disputes, particularly when weather or other emergency information is at stake?
Well, one approach that we would have is that if there is a dispute, that consumers should be able to change providers. So there shouldn't be a cancellation fee, and frankly, there should be a rebate if they're denied service, so that consumers have a choice.
That's not that easy to do.
I'm sorry, excuse me?
That's not that easy to do. I mean, if you just want to cancel right in the middle of the dispute. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
I understand it's not easy to do, but that is a choice that consumers can have in addition to getting the signal over the air. And by the way, it's free to anyone who has antennas. You can also pay for pay TV, but it is free to anyone who has an antenna.
Okay, yeah, representing antenna companies. Huh?
Anybody
else?
Could I address just the point about refunds and cancellation fees? And I think, as is clear, our view of the world is today it's an unfair fight as it stands. You've got one broadcaster who plays all the distributors off against each other. And with all due respect, Mr. Waldron is trying to actually make it even worse by saying, oh, let's give another hammer to the broadcasters by saying you have to do refunds and waive termination fees in all these cases, when quite frankly, the fact that there are blackouts are the exact reason why our disclosures to our consumers and our contracts are crystal clear. The programming is subject to change because we cannot ever guarantee that we're going to be able to provide any local broadcaster signal because there's this constant threat of takedowns.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to respond?
Yes, I think the proposal that we put forward, that during these disputes, the signal remains up while the negotiations are going on, therefore the consumer's not going to be harmed. And once the negotiations are completed, then the fees are paid retroactive. So no one really is disturbed or harmed by that, and it allows the consumer to continue to have service during that period of time.
Okay, anyone else? All right, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
I would just repeat that Mr. McKenzie's industry just went to court to defeat a standstill agreement in the context of the program access rules. And for them to now come in and say they'd like it in this instance, I think is unusually duplicious even by Washington standards.
Would you like to respond to that, Mr. McKenzie?
My company and the companies of the ACA were not involved in that suit, and so that's the large cable operators maybe, but not the small cable operators.
Okay, thank you.
I thank the gentlelady, the distinguished gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for having the committee meeting today. Let me just start with, I guess I'll show a little favoritism and start with Mr. Campbell from CenturyLink. And I guess my question to you would be, looking at most of your new subscribers and the fact that they're probably new to the internet, and looking at the area where you all are located, which if you go right down the street towards Monroe, Lake Providence, you're talking about one of the poorest places in the country that's consistently been that way. Have the fact that your new customers are coming in and taking video along with internet access, what kind of effect is that having in the area?
Congressman, thank you for the question. It's had a great effect, not only for our subscribers that take the video product, but for those who choose not to. As we upgrade the networks in these markets that we enter, we're offering broadband speeds that range from 25 to 40 megabits. So even those folks, we can't sign up to the video product that may not want it. Everyone else is getting enhanced broadband speed. So really the benefit is, from the video perspective, is great because it allows us to compete with the incumbent cable operator and offer a video product. But even from a broadband perspective, the effect is even greater.
From a price point, how are you all with the traditional video providers and cable providers?
Traditionally, in the markets where we've entered, we obviously enter lower than they do. What we've seen is some slowdown in price increases from the incumbent cable operator, although that hasn't. They slow down the increases. They still increase their prices, and the content acquisition is still a problem. But generally, our price point is lower.
Well, and let me just say that many local broadcast stations play an important role in providing local news, weather, and emergency information to the communities they serve. However, nearly 90% of households today watch their local broadcaster through a pay TV subscription, and therefore depend on cable, satellite, or other video provider to offer this programming. And as we mark the anniversary of 9/11, I believe that we all agree that viewers should not be deprived of local information during emergencies, regardless of how retransmission consent negotiation is proceeding. And I mentioned 9/11, but of course in Louisiana and in our area, we have to worry about hurricanes and tornadoes and other things. So I'd be interested whether the panelists will comment on their views as to whether it is a fair negotiating tactic to threaten blackouts given viewers are then at the risk of missing emergency information. What steps can we take to ensure that our constituents don't get caught in the middle of that fight, particularly when weather and other disasters may play a part? And anyone can start.
Sure. Well, of course, we don't think it's fair for consumers to be put in that position, especially given that the broadcasters received, at least initially, billions of dollars of spectrum for free under the premise that they would be stewards of that spectrum for the public good. And with all due respect to Mr. Waldron, I don't think saying to folks, hey, just go use an off-air antenna is an 100% satisfactory solution, because the broadcasters don't cover their entire DMAs with the free broadcast signal.
The vast majority, I want to emphasize, the vast majority of the thousands of broadcasters and the thousands of cable companies reach deals. So for your constituents and the vast majority of constituents, as I said in my opening statement, 1/100th of 1% of all viewing hours were lost to disruptions last year. You are 20 times more likely to use your service because of a power outage than you are because of retransmission consent impasse. So broadcasters have every commitment to reach the deals in the marketplace, and in the vast majority of times, those deals are reached and constituents continue to get their service.
Congressman, as you know, our company is steeped in a rich history of being a local rural communications provider, and we absolutely embrace localism. The issue from a video perspective is that the negotiations, I think Mr. Dodge mentioned this, negotiations aren't quite as local as they used to be. If we were dealing with a local station in the Colorado Springs market, then it might be a better negotiation process. We're dealing with syndicates that own 30, 40, 50 markets who play them against each other, who push these negotiations up to the national level and tie in all of this, non-local content into the agreement and say, take it or else. And so that's kind of the issue from the video perspective. If in utopia, if they were local and it worked the way that Mr. Waldron said, I don't disagree, but it doesn't work that way.
I see that my time has expired, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman's time expired. I thank the distinguished gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. This is one of those issues that my staff and others have said, this is just a terribly complicated issue, and I began reading about this last week, and I felt like I was back in law school and seminary, and I call seminary cemetery, and reading a paragraph and having to reread it 4 or 5 times and saying, what exactly is being said here? And Ms. Patton, you made a great point about that. This is just chaotic. This is just is great. And then I've been listening today, and what I come back to is having the great joy of serving Georgia's 9th Congressional District, which is northeast Georgia, the mountains, the start of the Appalachian Trail, very rural, but also very urban in certain areas, is what I hear lost here is the people who are not in this room and paid to be here. And that is my constituents back home who could really, frankly, care less about the complexity of it. They're wanting to be able to get their news, to watch new ideas, and to watch new TV, and to watch new programming. And sometimes the complacency of what I've seen here today is more of fighting for our battles and our market share than ending up the bottom line is the person that we actually serve. And this is some of the questions that I want to take up first. Mr. Donato, you made a question answered a few minutes ago, and I'm just going to assume that it was sort of off the cuff, but you said, well, the DMA is what it is, almost implying like Nielsen, we are because we're in statute doing what we do, but you don't always have to be there. We can change that. And then we can there can be other ways to look at DMAs and going very conservatively and this kind of thing. So I would like for you to explain the process in which Nielsen decides to review current DMA boundaries and tell me whether or not Northeast Georgia is under current consideration.
Currently, the process is annually. We go in and we evaluate the share of tuning to stations from the home market. And the market for a particular county, which has a majority of the viewing or the largest share, it is to that home market that a county is assigned. In some cases, very large or rural or counties which are on the sort of outskirts of the DMA, we'll actually split counties and put one part of the county in one market and one part of the county in the other market.
Does safety ever become an issue with your I mean, you tend to talk about viewership, but I mean, we've talked about safety here. We talked about hurricanes, tornadoes. Does safety ever enter into what you're thinking about? Because by splitting a county, Elbert County is one of mine that is split. I was watching just a few months ago when we had an issue with ice. I did not even see 4 of my counties on the Atlanta area, which I am in Gainesville, even listed there. I mean, is there safety that ever comes into account of what you're talking about?
The DMA is entirely based on viewing. So it's
okay.
It's
and I appreciate that, and because we have some things I want to cover here. So these gentlemen have talked about safety and localism and these kind of things, but yet when we do the DMA, safety is not a consideration being taken into account. So I mean, so the argument is really interesting here. We get them talking about localism and safety. We get you saying, well, we don't even take it into account for DMAs.
I guess I would respond in this way. So the DMA is basically set up as a commercial entity so that buyers and sellers of advertising understand the geography associated with viewing audiences. It's the basis for literally hundreds of billions of dollars of commercial activity. And it really is the thing that has supported local television all along. It's objective, it's based on viewer preferences, it's not based on any rules. We frequently talk to congressmen and women when there are issues that arise in terms of someone not seeing a signal and they go to their congressman or woman. And we're
going to talk about that in just a second.
Yeah, we basically handle them one at a time and try to demonstrate why they are where they are. And we listen to them. Sometimes this is the reason why we begin to split a county. If it does appear as if a county really part of a county goes to one market, part of a county goes to another market in terms of the viewer preferences.
Well, I think one of my counties in particular, I think that is just a false distinction. But really, I think what's happening here is we're talking on 2 different levels. When we deal with this DMA issue, one part we're dealing with localism and the safety aspects and why we need local broadcasting and why the providers, satellite cable providers, get into this market. And on your angle, you're not even discussing really what some of the arguments are being made here. So that's a concern. I may submit more questions for the record for you at a later time. Mr. Waldron, how specifically are broadcasters willing to facilitate the availability? As I said before, I have 4 counties that are orphan counties. I would like a commitment from you to work with my office, and I know that they have already been working there, to make sure that we get this question addressed, because it came up in my town hall meetings. People they understand this, they get it, because we're really in a different dynamic on those 4 counties and really split between 2 smaller markets in the dominant Atlanta market in which most of them participate in. Can I get a commitment out of you continuing to work with me on those orphan counties that I have?
Absolutely.
Okay. The other question here, and this is sort of an overall question. I'll leave this one open. It's not one that I had prepared, but it came to me as I was listening to you, and I'm out of time, I believe, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I'll have to submit it for the record, but I'm not sure why you can't. Can I have 30 seconds, Mr. Chairman?
30 seconds would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I read the New York Times. I read the Washington Post. I read the Wall Street Journal. I read the Atlanta Journal. I read the Gainesville Times. I even read the Fannin News Observer. I get information from all over. Why couldn't I have my local broadcasting and the Los Angeles affiliate if I wanted to? And I'm not setting myself up so anybody in the audience says, oh, he's for one side or the other. No, I'm just asking an honest question with the way things have developed. Shouldn't the question be either or, not be either or and be and?
Well, but if
Make it very
if I
brief.
may answer,
Time's
or-
expired. You may answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the argument is that exclusive territories are very common in business. Let's say a beer distributorship or a car dealership, okay? Well, that's what a local broadcaster is. They are the CBS outlet, if you will, for a CBS affiliate in Gainesville or Atlanta. They are that outlet. If you're bringing in another CBS station, then you actually have defeated the exclusivity that the broadcaster negotiated for. Okay.
Gentleman's time has expired. I thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank all of you for being here today and continuing as we have more questions. I wanted to start with Mr. Padden. Just you haven't talked about localism at all, and with your proposal, how that would impact access to local information.
Again, I'm just suggesting to you that marketplace forces would be a better servant of consumers' interests. If there's programming they're interested in, whether it's local programming or something from somewhere else, and you leave it to the market and there's money to be made providing that program to them, they'll get it. And the overwhelming majority of the viewing is to local broadcast stations because of the overwhelming interest in the local news and weather and sports. And in a free market system, that would continue. There'd be absolutely no diminution in that at all. And I mean, why you would want to continue a system that is based on the Nielsen ratings from 1972 to decide who gets to watch what, I don't understand.
And, you know, with the new technology today, the internet, people are getting a lot of local information even when they're not at home. Many of us, when we're here, are still staying connected at home and getting local information in other ways because we have people traveling around a lot and they're not always in their local area, but they still want news that's happening from home. So given the development of new technologies and the different consumer behavior in terms of access to content, and making sure that given that we have legislation from 1988 and Nielsen ratings from earlier, how do we make sure that we put together policy that doesn't inhibit innovation or change going forward as we look at what we should do here in the next step? And so that's kind of a broad question for everyone, but we want to make sure that whatever we do addresses issues that consumers have today, but also doesn't block innovative new entrants that may also want to compete in this space. Mr. Donato, you were nodding.
I'd like to answer that, actually. So we measure viewing of television online. We've made an announcement. It's a very complicated technical problem of measuring it through tablets, but we've made an announcement that we've solved the technology, and starting the end of next year, viewership on tablets will also be included in the ratings. I suppose my point is we've got measurement solutions. The business relationships are very, very complicated, and I wouldn't comment on them. I would leave it to my fellow panelists to comment on them, but we do have the measurement solutions worked out.
And if I could comment on the 1972 Nielsen data point, I think one thing that's missing from the record is that although theoretically DMAs can change based on viewership, and viewership is what is measured, if there's only one signal that's available in a DMA, when you check the viewership, you're going to get the same local affiliate over and over and over again. And in Southwest Colorado, for example, which is, I mentioned is in the Albuquerque DMA, we've proposed to provide both Albuquerque and Denver to the folks in those two counties and let the consumers decide. So when Mr. Donato's firm calls them up, they can say, I'm listening to Albuquerque, I'm watching Albuquerque, and lo and behold, maybe the broadcasters are right. People down there prefer to buy their Chevrolets from Albuquerque, but some people might say I'm watching Denver, and ultimately it's a vote of the people to decide where those two counties should be.
I said
I'm sorry.
I said it before, but I don't understand the 1972 comment. Every year we evaluate viewership, and that's the basis on which DMAs are constructed.
So I wasn't just focused on
If I could
1972.
come
I'm
back to your
kind of
original-
focused on the speed of legislation and that, the way people are viewing, the way the industry work changes more quickly sometimes than legislation does. So how do we make sure we put together legislation that doesn't inhibit that innovation?
Well, if I could come back to your original question about technology. Technology is very exciting for broadcasters because, as you're probably well aware, with Slingbox and other technologies, watchabc.com, you can actually use the internet and technologies to keep up with your local broadcaster even when you're in Washington, D.C. And with the CBS issue with Time Warner, an important part of that was the online digital rights so that CBS could make that programming available to Hulu or Netflix or Amazon Instant Video. So the technology is actually expanding opportunities to access your local broadcaster.
Yeah, Mr. Padden.
If I could respond just briefly, you're right, new technology is creating all kinds of wonderful opportunities. Unfortunately, the compulsory license that you've given to the cable industry and the satellite industry, you have not given to the online industry. So, for example, you give the rights to broadcast programming to Comcast and to DirecTV, but you don't give it to Netflix. I don't understand why. I'm not advocating that you give it to Netflix. What I'm advocating is you undo the license you have given to cable and satellite that currently puts online distributors at a disadvantage. We're a party, the United States is a party to a number of international treaties that prohibit compulsory licensing of television programming to online providers. So the only way you can level the playing field is by repealing the license for cable and satellite.
My time's expired, so thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Lamar Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me apologize for being tardy as well as for having to leave early. This is one of those days where all the 3 committees on which I serve are meeting concurrently, so I'm having to shift around. Also, I may be covering some subjects that have already been covered, and I apologize for that, but I would like to address a couple of questions to our panelists today. My first question, I think, would go to Mr. Dodge, Mr. Waldron, and Mr. McKenzie, and it is this. The temporary compulsory license has been extended innumerable times by Congress. And my question is, how well is it working for television viewers, and do you feel that it ought to be reauthorized for another 5 years? Mr. Dodge.
I would say it's working wonderfully. As a result of the last reauthorization, DISH is now providing local channels in all 210 DMAs.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Waldron.
With respect to the local channels, I might surprise you. I agree completely with Mr. Dodge. We think the local compulsory licenses actually do work. I disagree with my friend Preston Patton on that one. Broadcasters think the system is working.
And Mr. McKenzie.
We're going to go 3 in a row. I also agree.
No surprise.
It's worked.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for Mr. Garrett, Mr. Padden, and Mr. Dodge. And it is this: what alternatives exist to the compulsory license, and would those alternatives adequately protect the rights of copyright holders? Mr. Garrett.
The Copyright Office addressed that very question in a report that they prepared for Congress here, when they talked about the different types of licensing: direct licensing, sub-licensing, and collective licensing. And the report lays it out in excellent detail here. The one thing I would mention is just the actual history here of what's happened with WTBS, for example. I have had the privilege of being present, I think, at every one of the hearings this subcommittee has held on this issue since the late 1970s. And when I go back, I think about the years where people would debate about making WTBS available and can only be done via compulsory licensing. And in fact, what happened in 1990 is WTBS converted to a cable network. And today it's available to virtually every cable subscriber, not pursuant to compulsory licensing, but pursuant to free marketplace negotiated agreements, including agreements that Major League Baseball has and has kept a package of programming on TBS for several years and will through the year 2021.
Okay. Mr. Padden?
There are plenty of marketplace alternatives that would be far more appropriate and fair to copyright owners than a government system where government boards set the rates.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Mr. Dodge.
And we believe that the compulsory licenses do still continue to have utility. And part of the reason is what Mr. Padden noted in his written testimony, which is, to this day, the broadcasters still haven't cleared copyrights through to the viewer in all instances. And that's the magic of a compulsory license, actually.
Okay. Thank you all for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Texas, the distinguished gentleman from New York.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the distinguished ranking member as well. It seems to me that many of the disputes over the last several years that have, in some instances, unfortunately, resulted in a temporary blackout and inability for consumers, some of whom I represent back home in Brooklyn and parts of Queens, to get content, all seem to occur in and around significant sporting events. And so most recently, in the run-up to the start of the football season, there was a conflict that was resolved on the eve of the football season starting, thankfully. In the past, back at home, there was a conflict that prevented some consumers from seeing part of the early Yankees run through a particular playoff season that wound up resolving itself. And then there was a conflict at home that centered around the ability for some people to see MSG, which broadcast the Knicks. The Knicks were off to a terrible start, so nobody cared. And then Jeremy Lin came on the scene, and it became a big problem. And it ultimately resolved itself. But there's a lot of conflicts, not all exclusively, but a lot that just seem to have interesting timing as it relates to major sporting events. And so I was very interested in Mr. McKenzie's observations as it relates to sports licensing fees. I believe you testified that sort of these transmission fees have been skyrocketing in recent times. Is that correct?
True.
And I think you also indicated that, you know, as a result, consumers are hurt as a result of the increase in the sports transmission fees. Is that right?
That's our opinion, yes.
Now, could you elaborate on that opinion in terms of how exactly you think the consumers are hurt by increase in licensing fees connected to ESPN or some of the other sports content?
Well, for instance, ESPN, as reported by SNL Kagan, the cost of that channel alone is $5.50. And that is a channel that's required to be carried at the basic tier. So whether you are a sports fan or not, you're having to pay for ESPN. So when you look at the sports programming that's on the cable channels and on the broadcast channels, the amount of the programming costs that can be attributed to sports, and I don't have an exact number, but the estimate is, you know, a third of the expense.
Now, who requires ESPN to be carried at the basic tier?
That's part of the negotiations that you have with Disney. When you're negotiating with them, they will only allow you to carry ESPN if you put it on the lowest tier.
Okay. You also mentioned in your testimony that you thought that the antitrust exemption that exists perhaps should be revisited because of the dominant market share that exists with the major sports leagues. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, in 1922, I believe there was an antitrust exemption granted blanket to Major League Baseball, and then you reference legislation that this Congress passed in 1961. But if we were to revisit the antitrust exemption and adjustments were to be made, recognizing that there's a difference between baseball and the other major sports leagues, how do you think that that could impact the landscape in a manner that was favorable toward consumers?
Well, I think that what you have, rather than one entity negotiating on behalf of the entire league, you would have individual teams negotiating in their local market. And I think that that would allow for more competition and probably lower costs.
Would you comment on that, Mr. Garrett?
Congressman, as I indicated earlier, very few people want to hear what I have to say about antitrust policies and antitrust laws. My focus is on the copyright side. But what I will say is that with the Sports Broadcasting Act, that it is, among other things, responsible for why you and the American public will be able to see the World Series on Fox this year. It is that law which gives the Commissioner of Baseball, gives the NFL and other leagues the ability to pull together rights and make available to the American public the kind of programming that is now made available. I think the law has worked well. It has not been abused. And it is one of the reasons why today I can come here and say to you that every one of the approximately 5,000 games played in Major League Baseball, 5,000 telecasts of games in Major League Baseball is available in one fashion or another to your constituents and to all consumers.
Thank you.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman. The distinguished lady from Texas recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think all of us are expressing our appreciation to our chairman and to the ranking member and indicating that our calendars caused us to be delayed. In one instance, Homeland Security Committee was discussing Syria, and I might add that the combination of gentlemen that are before us, content and the various providers, have helped to contribute to America's education and discourse on this very important issue. And so we are here for more than just a separation of powers as to who has what and who is to be regulated, but to be able to thank you for how you contribute to the public discourse on some very vital issues. We are engaged in this regulatory discussion because Congress, in its wisdom, saw fit to regulate both the content and the providers in order to create more robust competition, which I think is vital, and particularly the responsibilities of the Judiciary Committee are on the issue of competition. And I might add that there is merit in everyone's position, as I've been able to glean as I've sat here. And certainly to the National Association of Broadcasters, I want to just be historic in my reflection on the old days of the black and white television with that antenna where you did provide content of joy to those communities that could get a television, and all they had to do was to plug it into the socket. So we've come to a new posture that for many was a very difficult change because they had to now pay for something that they had been able to plug in and receive some form of content. But in the wisdom of the Congress and the innovativeness of technology, we've all come to live together with the new access that consumers have. In the course of that, I want to raise a number of questions. All of us, I think, or many members have expressed certainly the concern of the issue of blackout and how it impacts not so much the two entities that are having a disagreement. I heard someone say that that's only a minute percentage that occurred, but if it occurs at all, it's a difficult challenge for many of us who deal with our constituents. With all due respect and reflection, the customer will be calling the satellite company or they'll be calling the cable company, and they will not be calling the entity that has the content. And we have to find a balance with that, because there are concerns that this would be a growing problem. And so I'm going to be posing a question, a generic question to start out with, and I'd appreciate those who would answer it could do so. And I might have missed it. So this is just a plain simple question. Do we expect to have these content conflicts coming up over and over again? And is there a way that the industry will look to solve those kinds of concerns? We know what the issues are. The issues are, I have content, you're a provider, you want to get my content, you have to pay. But are there ways to handle that in a preferable way than to skew what Congress tried to regulate and balance to protect the content, which rightly so, and then also to give competition? That's one question. The other question is, should the upcoming reauthorization include a discussion of other issues related to satellite cable and the big four broadcasters, and what do you think they should be? Or do you think, and again, to those who would want to answer that, it should be simply a clean reauthorization? The Judiciary Committee has its jurisdiction and others have theirs. Specifically to Mr. Dodge on the Dish Network, are the cord cutters or cord shavers that those who do not subscribe to a multi-channel video programming distributor reduce the scope of the MVP's ability? Are they of concern to the Dish Network? And if Congress did not reauthorize Section 119 compulsory license, how expensive or burdensome would that be for you? And that's specific to you. Can you answer the other questions about getting a resolution on how you debate this question going forward, and then the reauthorization question?
Sure. To answer your first question.
And this is for everyone, Mr. Dodge. Why don't you wait on the question I specifically asked you, which was on, yeah. Others on the comment, please.
Representative Lee, this is Jim Campbell again. Yes, I think something can be done to resolve this. What we need to do is look at the rules that are currently in place that are slanted in favor of the broadcasters, that were created at a time when the broadcasters were facing issues with the incumbent operators, and now the shield has turned into a sword. And so if some of those issues were removed, such as network non-duplication and syndicated exclusivity, then I think you would see a much more balanced negotiation process. We have incentive to get local channels, the local news channels, to our consumers, and I think the broadcasters have the incentive as well. But the problem is that so much of the national content is tied to it. If we were able to carry that content, I think the negotiations would be more balanced.
Mr. Dodge, on your question, thank you.
Oh, sure. Well, and I would say to answer your first question, is this problem going away, for lack of a better term? The proof is in the numbers. In 2010, there were 10 local blackouts. In 2011, there were roughly 50. Last year, there were roughly 100, and now we're on track to set a record with 120, which is not a record I think any of us will be happy to hit. With respect to your question on whether cord cutters are a concern for Dish, the answer is no. We welcome the competition. and we need to find a way ourselves to actually evolve and participate in that.
Thank you. Anyone else?
If I might,
Ms. Jackson Lee at her office. I'll give you one more minute.
I was just going to say, broadcasters support a clean reauthorization of Stella, and the vast majority of deals do get done. And with your opening comment, still today you can get a TV and an antenna and plug it in, and you get TV for free.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence, and thank you. I look forward to talking with you all individually. Thank you very much.
I thank the gentlelady, the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the chair for convening this hearing and all of the witnesses for participating. It's been a delightful, free-flowing discussion. It's been great to see Mr. Dodge and Mr. Waldron seated next to each other, going toe-to-toe. I'll always benefit, since I've started going last in the series of questioning on our side, from what has taken place, because there's always one comment that kind of pops up in the whole discussion that hits my mind. That comment today came from Mr. Dodge when he looked at Mr. Waldron and said, you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth. My thought was that most of us in all of the industries, is my experience, have talked out of both sides of their mouths, depending on what's beneficial to their particular industry. But I did note that it was particularly applicable to the broadcasters, because I've been a strong advocate for people being paid for their intellectual property. And for that reason, I've been a strong advocate of your ability to negotiate for payment for your products. I think that's very important. What I have not been able to reconcile, however, is how you apply a different standard to the people who provide copyrighted material on radio, the performers. I just don't understand that dichotomy. So I'm hopeful that you all will maybe come around on the radio side to the same position that you hold on the when you own the protected material. Understand that there are performers out there that own the protected material that they produce, and they deserve to be paid also. So I'm not going to belabor that, although I would note that it seems to me to be unfair for you all to take the position that there is some kind of performance tax when the government gets no part of the performance rights revenue, yet there is no performance tax when you get paid for what you have the copyright to. So I hope you all will help me reconcile that. I won't do it here in public, but it is a concern that I have, and I think these are inordinately difficult issues. I kind of come down closer probably to where Mr. Padden does than most people. We'd probably be better off to get the government out of the way, not only in this context, but in the performance rights context too. And so it won't be surprise to anybody because I announced it at a hearing right before the break that I was introducing a bill to do away with the compulsory license of music, but to make sure that if you play a performer's music, that you compensate them and go and work out a deal with them if that's what you want to do. I'm kind of free market on a lot of this stuff, Mr. Padden, and I was particularly appreciative that your testimony was the last testimony, and so I thank all of you for being here. I won't necessarily ask a question unless Mr. Waldron wants to respond to what I didn't intend to be a personal attack on NAB because I started out by saying we all are self-serving and talk out of both sides of our mouths. I think that's characteristic of all of us at one time or another. I just use your industry as an example, as Mr. Dodge did. I thought his comment was appropriate. Mr.
I was just going to say, we look forward to further conversations with you. It probably is best in private. We don't accept all that you said, but we can continue this conversation.
Well, we've continued those conversations on a local and national level, and they've always been cordial and congenial. So, as you all said, you and Mr. Dodge and Mr. Waldron are good friends, and Mr. Dodge and Mr. Padden are good friends. All of us are good friends. We don't always agree on every issue. Mr. Chairman, before you close the record, the Motion Picture Association of America has requested that we submit this infographic illustrating the continued rapid growth of online viewing options for audiences for the record. So I would ask unanimous consent that we make this a part of the record. I'm not even sure what it is, but I'm in complete agreement that anything that will help us make good decisions ought to be part of the record.
Without objection.
So I ask unanimous consent to submit it.
Now, if it ignites in my hands, Mr. Watt, I won't hold you harmless for that. But we'll accept that without objection. I thank the gentleman. I want to thank those of you who have been in attendance for the entire hearing. Obviously, your interest is more than just casual. And I particularly want to thank the witnesses that you have contributed significantly to a very complex and a very important issue. And we may meet again. But it's been a pleasure having you all with us. Today's the hearing is now concluded. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. This hearing stands adjourned.
Thank you, Mr.
Very nice meeting you.
Good to meet you.
I apologize. I couldn't remember if it was Waldron or Waldron.